Yeah, so my name is Stephen Sloan, and the first thing you'll notice about me is my accent. Yeah, I wasn't born here, but I've worked here a lot. As I just mentioned, I first came to the area in about 2007, so it's going on 20 years now, 19 years. And what we were able to do coming in here, I was with a company called Aquaspire at that time, and I worked with the Water District to help identify, learn what's going on underground. And so from that, we learned a lot of techniques, a lot of things that are now part and parcel of what we do around here in terms of slowing down the pivots, in terms of going to bubble mode, in terms of doing a lot of things. So that didn't come from anything me telling farmers what to do. That came from me helping farmers learn what they're doing and work out better ways of doing it. And so it's you guys, it's the leading farmers in the area have, by showing them what's happening underground, they've actually worked out how to do it better. And so I'd like to share how to work out what's going on underground and also the techniques that we've learned so that you can become a better irrigator. Because you know, when I first sat in a winter meeting in January of 2010, after the 2009 season, and all I heard was if you want to grow a 250 bushel crop, you need 6 gallons per acre per minute. And I know that guys now, there are people out there that are growing probably 270 bushels on probably 3.5 to 4 gallons per acre per minute. And it's like, wow, you know, the yield's gone up and the water use has gone down. Why? Because we've learned what to do. And to learn what to do, we've been able to look underground. So I'm going to break this into 2 different presentations. I'll have a break in the middle so you don't have to listen to me drone on. But it's so exciting when you can learn from the crop. And if you learn from the crop, you can't get it wrong, right? And so let's dive into it. I'm going to start with this measuring water use. So we're going to look at well, I don't have to do this because Jeff just did it, how water is held in the soil with the sponges and stuff. We actually had the same slides, like literally the same slides if you look in the slide in the book. And then also the important terminology. So we're going to tick those off. You've already got me through the first 10 minutes. But really what we want to then do is look at the different sensors. You've heard about soil moisture sensors. What are they? How do they work? And in order to know how to use something, you want to know how not to use it, right? And if you, because a lot of people think, oh, I'm using this correctly, but if you're not, then you're going to get the wrong answer. So it's just as important to know what not to do as it is to know what to do in terms of how they work. So there's tensiometers or tensiometric methods, how much the plant has to suck on the soil to get water out of it. And then we've also got volumetric methods, so how much water is held in the soil, like a cup, you know, how full is my gas tank. And then there's evapotranspiration modeling, which a lot of people, I'm not going to go into it by the way, it's just another technique that's being used widely and it's great for modeling. And so using weather data. And then new technology close to my heart because they've helped develop probes that go underground and stay there. And then we can look at where to put them so you get the right information, because once again, if you put it in the wrong place, you're going to get the wrong answer. So looking at variability, you know, in terms of what the soil is, the topography, in terms of how you're placing water. That distribution uniformity and soil wetting patterns. It's going to, where you put a probe is different in drip versus sprinkler versus bubble mode. And so you've got to think about that. And so let's jump into it. So I've already glossed over, I've blanked out the first two parts of this about how that water is held in the soil. But what I do want to stress to you is the gas tank, right? I always think about it like, and I don't have a potted plant here because I actually didn't drive, I flew in, but how much water the plant has access to, there's two parts to that. It's what is holding the water, i.e. the soil. So if I have different soil, I've got different amounts of water in the soil, but if I have a different root depth, I have a different access to the amount of water. In fact, it could be as dramatic as this. If I have a shallow root system, I'm in a shallow pot. Even though that pot might hold a lot of water of the medium that it's in, right? It's a super sponge. But if it's not very large compared to, you know, maybe I've got a soil that's of a lesser, you know, holding capacity, but if I've got a really deep root system, I've got a big pot. So think about it. I want you to keep that in the back of your mind that how big is my pot, and it's about the soil, the water in the soil, but how much of it I can get back. Think of it like I've got a big 32-ounce drink and a straw. How far that straw goes into my 32-ounce cup determines how much water I can get back out of that. So really important. So keep that in the back of your mind. But when it comes to measuring water use, so you might have heard of a thing called a tensiometer, or a gypsum block, or a watermark sensor. That's different types of sensors. This watermark sensor has been around for 50 years. It's been around for a very long time. They're very cheap, and they've had a really good role in teaching people how to measure soil moisture and how to irrigate better. And so what it's doing is think of it like a sponge, and it's holding water there, and then it lets it go at a very measurable rate. And so all you're doing is it's two wires, and you're putting a current through there. The more water that's there, the more current you're going to get. And as you've got less water, you get less current. So you can just look at the voltage reading, I should say, and it's a very, very simple measure. And so what it's being used for is to basically simulate how much stress the plant is under to pull water away from the soil. So what Jeff showed you just before is a picture of soil where it's running out the bottom, and soil where water is available to the crop, and then you've got soil where water is coating the particles, but it's stuck to the soil, and it's stuck harder to the soil than what the plant can do to pull it away. And so you'll reach a magic number that says, oh, when I get to a certain suction pressure, that's it, the plant can't get any more. And so there's different threshold numbers for corn and cotton and other crops, but that's really how they work. The trouble is that if there's no pressure, then it just tells you that you've got full voltage. It can't tell you if you're wetter than wet, right? So it only measures really well at the dry end. It doesn't measure at all at the wet end. And so you can overwater with these. In fact, if you went to Nebraska, where they've got a lot of water and they've been using these for a long time, the whole industry has learned to overwater just because they were so scared about running out that they overwatered. And so we've got to teach them both ends. So, and then vegetable production, you've got this tensiometer, so they use them to just go out and literally read the gauge. But one thing, if the soil dries out and it cracks, then you've broken suction, and the whole thing just goes away. So they're good in crops that don't dry the soil out very much, like corn. They're not so good in crops that dry the soil out a lot, like cotton. And so there's limitations. What you get when the soil dries out, it actually goes up. It's higher suction. Then we irrigate and it drops down. And then the soil dries out. So we can actually see that, here where we're drying the soil out in that shallow sensor, but we're not really drying the soil out much of the deep one. And then it starts to dry out at the deeper sensor, and then we irrigate and they both drop down. So that's just how it works. Magic numbers and with thresholds. So they're cheap. You can actually farm over them. You've got to go out and find the cable again. But they've had a role, and they've had a really good role. But it's kind of like using a cassette when everyone's got Spotify, cassette tape, right? So I grew up with cassette tapes, but now my kids all have Spotify. So it's kind of the same technology. They also take a long time to equilibrate. And the hardest thing about it is that they measure in a ball. You'd think, oh great, I'm measuring a big volume of soil. They're really accurate, true. But because they measure up and down, you've got to keep them separated. You've got to keep them separate by at least a foot, or else you're going to get overlapping readings. So, as I said, they've had a place, but I put them in the old technology bracket. So then we move on to volumetric soil measurement. So this is how much water does the soil contain, and as you can see, there's a ton of different sensors here. They all kind of work the same way. That's actually a bit dated now because John Deere aren't doing it anymore. But what we've got are single sensors, and we've got probe style sensors. So a probe style sensor looks like my other prop here. This is one that's very long, it's 5 feet long, and it's got sensors every 4 inches all the way down, kind of like what these ones do. But if we just first look at a neutron probe, this is kind of a placeholder because this is still regarded as the gold standard, right, for research. Why? Because it's really rugged and you can measure across season to season to season. It doesn't matter. It's not affected by the installation, it's affected by air gaps. It's radioactive. It actually sends neutrons out into the soil and they get reflected back off hydrogen atoms. And hydrogen in the soil is water, H2O. So the more water that's there, the more gets reflected back. But it's the fact that it's radioactive means that that's a problem. You need to get licensed. You don't want to be using that thing all the time. But it's also, you've got to carry it around from site to site. So the reason it's used in research, because researchers have lots of time, or they've got field techs to go out and do all the work. I cut my teeth back in the 90s, running around on farms for 3 seasons in the cotton industry, lugging one of these things around. Luckily, didn't irradiate myself, but it's a rugged device and it's really good. But once again, it's slow, it's expensive because it's labor intensive, and you only get one set of readings every 2 days. So then you can move to a capacitance sensor, and as I said, there were lots of different ones. There's probe style and there's single sensor style. Single sensors are usually for research because once again, you've got to dig a hole and put these things in there. Commercially, it's much easier to just auger a hole and put this thing down the hole so that that's ground level and connect it up to a transmitter and away you go. So that's what's being used as the state of the art in commercial scheduling. I say it's the state of the art. It's been around for 20 years. But the thing is, this kind of data, all these lines here, they are as important as an X-ray is to a doctor, or an ultrasound, or an MRI, or a CAT scan, right? If you want to see something and understand it, you've got to look inside when it comes to medicine. If you want to understand how your crop is growing, how it's taking on water and nutrients, and let's face it, the only way you can get water and nutrients into a crop is through the root zone, but you can't see the root zone. So you need to have that X-ray of the root zone, and then you can start to see what's going on. And so what we've got here is a whole bunch of lines, which I'm going to teach you how to read basically in the next presentation. So you're just going to have to take it as read. But this is basically these different coloured lines are the different sensors on that probe. So we've got them, these are spread out, so that's the top sensor, which may be 4 inches down or it may be 12 inches down. It depends whether it's a probe that's from the surface or whether we bury it, which I'll talk about. And then we can start to see those different layers, or we can look at a single line on the top here, which is like my gas gauge. We talked about the gas tank, how big's the gas tank. Now I've got a gas gauge, and I can start to see on there, and we're going to break this down. I'm going to actually take you through it. I just wanted to explain the different sensors in this segment. And so what you've got is this probe that actually reads sideways. In fact, let's go to the next slide. You've got these, basically you're setting up a little radio wave. It's like these two coils in there, these just rings that sit inside this probe. They set up a frequency. So you put a electronic current through there, and we're actually, think of it like a radio at each of these levels. And if you're old enough, half the people in this room aren't, back remember a manually tuned radio station, and you go down the dial and you tune in the radio station, and then what happens is when we have water, it slows down the speed that those waves move. So I've got to go down the dial and tune it in again. And the distance down the dial is how much water that's there. So that's kind of the best way I've found of explaining it. But essentially what we're doing is we're measuring how much water is in the soil. But the beautiful thing is that these measure sideways. You can see these lines go sideways, straight out. And so it doesn't overlap. Even though these are 4 inches apart, what happens here does not overlap with what happens there, which doesn't overlap. There's separate slices in the soil. And we're reading this with a logger, maybe every 15 minutes, maybe every 30 minutes, maybe every hour, but we can see exactly what's happening in that soil all the time. And that's the key thing here. So what I wanted to point out too is that you might have heard a guy tell you, oh, these things measure 4 inches out into the soil. Yeah, that's true. I'm not lying. If I brought a bucket of water and I get 4 inches away, I'll start to see it. The thing is, it measures from the side of the tube out. And what happens on the side of the tube has much more of an effect than what happens 4 inches out. So it actually looks more like this, where you know, if I'm like basically 85% of the readings, 90% of the readings, 95% of the readings here literally are only 1 3/4 inches out from the side of the tube. But from 2 inches out, I'm at 97%. So think of it just like a series of donuts around here. We're measuring a very small amount of soil around the probe. And that brings in a really interesting way that you read it. So why am I telling you all this? Because it does matter. Because if I'm measuring a really small amount of water around here, I'm going to measure that super accurately. And if I had this in a laboratory and I mixed up the soil and the water really evenly and packed it in there, my calibration would be awesome. But that's not what happens out there in the soil. You've got root channels, you've got earthworms, you've got cracks, and you get wet parts and dry parts. And if I've got a wet part right close to where the probe is reading, then I'm going to get a different reading than if that is dry right there. So there is variability built in, not from the sensor, but in the soil that you're reading. So that small volume just means you have to use it a different way, right? And I'll show you that in a sec. But really, what we need to know here is installation is critical. I don't want to get air gaps in there, because if I do get a crack next to the tube, like I'm going all the way down the radio station and off the dial, it doesn't work. So these need to be professionally installed or from a trained installer. So it's not something that generally people are encouraged to do themselves as farmers. You'll get somebody, a business, to come and do it. That's the reason why. It's just because it's a very sensitive bit of gear, right? So they've got a small sphere of influence. This is mainly for the printed notes, but the thing is that they're highly repeatable. So let's have a look at what that means. Well, the fact is that when it's highly repeatable, I can take a reading relative to itself, right? If I have a reading and the next one's higher, I've gone up in moisture. If the next reading's lower, it's gone down in moisture. It just makes it really hard to know exactly how much moisture is there. But we don't need to know that, because we've got all the dots built in. So every 15 minutes, every 30 minutes, I can see, am I going up in moisture or am I going down in moisture? And that's the key thing here. It really is. So it's all in the shape of the graph. Remember that. So once again, this is for the printed notes. We don't need to go on to that, but really from a representation, if we had a neutron probe and we took 3 readings, they're never going to be the same. This is why you need repeatability, which is why it becomes really slow and cumbersome. When I take it from this site to that site, at every reading, I've got to hit the button 3 times. And I might have to wait 30 seconds each time. So it might be a minute and a half just to do one level, then a minute and a half just to do another level, and then I've got to go and do all that again, at a different site. So it's just very slow. But if I take those readings and average them, I'm going to be on the bullseye, and it's worth calibrating. So I can, from a research station point of view, I can know exactly how much water is in the ground, and I can see the difference, and I can use that for research. But we don't need that for scheduling, and I'll show you why. When it comes to the watermark sensors or matrix potential, they're really slow. You can see how the pictures kind of take time to appear. It's because I've got to let that water kind of soak and equilibrate. But also I get that fuzzy picture, and then we need to spread them apart like by at least a foot. So generally people have only gone like 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, maybe 4th foot, and it's kind of an indicator, but it's a fuzzy picture when we've got like basically laser vision. And why I say that is if I take a capacitance probe and I have 3 readings, they're going to be the same number. It's like a really, really stretched shooting rifle, right? I can get that bullet right through a quarter dollar at 100 yards, and every single time. The trouble is, it's like the scope, and every time I go to a different site, it's going to have a different reading. So it's like you've taken the scope off it and remounted it, and now you've got to sight it in again. Well, we don't even worry about that. We'll just look at it relative to itself. So if we can take all those readings and just say, okay, I know where I am, and now I can say, oh, well, am I getting it wetter or am I getting it drier? And that's the key thing to this technology. And I tell you, having been in the industry for so long, I get frustrated when some companies will say, hey, we've got a calibration for you. Here is the number, and we're going up or down by X number of inches. Don't trust it. It's the wrong way to look at it. So We'll teach you how to look at it correctly. Weather stations. You've probably all heard of Mesonettes. Like this is the West Texas Mesonet. Doesn't come up this far, I don't believe. But
yeah, West Texas. There's 7 stations inside the district.
okay, perfect.
Yes.
So there is access.
Little feeding cows there, man.
So, why do we want weather data? Obviously, we want to look into the future and all of that, but also you can take your wind or temperature, humidity, wind speed, and what am I looking here? Solar radiation, and I can work out basically what there's been a lot of research done over the years, like back in the 50s and 60s, to say, okay, I can measure that, like the reference point is grass, right? What's a well-watered, well-mown grass surface use? And that's what's called ETO, potential evapotranspiration. And then you say, okay, well my crop, I'm growing corn, not grass. What corn is 10 feet tall and it's using a whole lot more water. Sure it is. So you apply a crop factor to say, you know what, whatever grass was, I'm going to make it more than that. And so I can actually say, okay, I've got an initial crop factor when the crop is small, and then as the crop gets bigger, I'm going to say it uses more and more and more, and then I'm going to say it uses less. So it's good, but it's best for modeling. And so if I want to say, hey, is this crop going to grow in that environment, or how does this year compare to last year, it's really, really good for that in terms of those sort of seasonal comparisons and things like that. In terms of tracking, once again, if you're not doing anything, it's great to say, okay, well, I think I'm going to start out by using 1/10 per day, and I'm going to get to 20 hundredths and then 25 hundredths and 30 hundredths. That's awesome. It puts you in the picture. But in terms of the way of using it accurately, it falls short because we're not actually measuring it, we're just calculating. And I will also say that the wind speed drives everything, right? You can think about this, you could put clothes on the line in the middle of winter and it's a cold day, and they'll dry beautifully because it's windy. You could be out there in the middle of a corn crop where it's hot and humid, and hang clothes on the line, not that you would because it's the middle of a corn crop, but you know what I'm saying, it's not windy and it's humid, and the clothes don't dry. So wind drives ET more than anything. So you get a hot windy day, that crop's going to be using a lot of water. So then we get on to the permanent probes. So the traditional scenario is we have a probe, we have a cable, the cable gets plugged into a transmitter, which is both a logger and a transmitter, and away we go. The thing is, what we developed back in 2019 is the ability to transmit wirelessly from here to here. And this probe, we've got 13 of them out here on this particular, at the Water Conservation Centre here. The first ones, or in fact, all but 2, 11 of them went in 2019, and so they've gone through 7 seasons already. We built it to last 5, and these things are both logging the soil moisture data at all the levels and transmitting every 30 minutes. And you can take that transmitter away, you can farm over it, and then you can bring it back. And when that's out of the ground, you can keep logging for 6 weeks and not lose any data. So as I'll show you, we've got some beautiful unbroken data sets from out here, and that matters. Especially, remember what I said, you're trying to compare the number to itself. If you can compare that to itself over a really long period of time, that's gold. So it doesn't matter whether it's below ground or above, at ground level, you've got sensors that read in the root zone. And so there's lots of different things. This is more for the notes, so I'm not trying to make you read it all. But essentially, whether it's, you don't want to put a permanent probe in if you're leasing the ground for a year. If it's a 1-year trial, if it's something where you're digging up the root zone like potatoes, okay? So it doesn't fit every scenario, but whether you're permanent or seasonal, you're going to get all these things that I'm going to take you through in terms of watching where the water goes, watching where the root goes, fertilizer, etc. But what you'll get that's different here, I call it prepare for planting and prepare for pollination. Everything from harvest to planting again, i.e. you harvest one crop, you take the probe out and you put it in the barn and you come back to it next year, well, all that data is missing. If you have a permanent probe, you can now say, where did I finish? And then what winter moisture did I have? And oh crap, I didn't get any. Now I've got a pre-water. And so I can manage that instead of having it sitting in the barn. So that's the biggest difference. So on that, here is a bit of data from this region. I'm not sure if there is from this farm, I don't think it was, but I would be looking at this saying, you know what, I can't really get any wetter than that. That's my line as my full point, which we heard Jeff talk about and others. So that's what the soil can hold, right? Well, what if I expanded that out and then said, okay, now I've gone through the winter and it was a winter that rained, and so it's like, oh, I thought I was full, but maybe I wasn't. And so the bigger the time frame you've got, the more you're going to learn. It's just pure and simple. It's like training ChatGPT. If you gave it a week's worth of data to learn on, it's going to be hopeless. If you give it a lifetime's worth of internet data, it's going to be really good. So it's just training the models. And the software is the same. The software can pick stuff. But if you haven't measured it, it's got no hope of picking it. So that's where having a longer time frame is good. And then that longer time frame, as I said, we've gone from, this is data from right here, just out the back, where we've kind of worked that out in year one, and then we can carry that forward. Sometimes you don't quite get there, sometimes you do. And so we can actually see the difference between a corn crop and a cotton crop, and a corn crop and a cotton crop. And so first time that some of the corn agronomists saw this, went, see, I told you, cotton uses a lot of water, which people say in the season it doesn't. It can get by with 10 or 12 inches of irrigation. It's half of what corn needs. Yeah, it's like taking a rental car out. You've got to gas it up before you take it back to the airport. That gas isn't free. You're still going to get dinged for it. So that, if I end up down here and it happens to be like this time of year in February, I can go, oh, I know where I've got to get to and I know where I am. And I can use calibration. I can get a bit of a rough idea, but I can also just start pre-watering and I can just see, am I getting there? Am I getting there? And like Jordan said, pre-water, if you can avoid it, great. But there's very few of us now that can keep up. In fact, I'd challenge that there's no one here that can keep up with what a fully watered corn crop needs. Nobody's going to try and go into a season with 6 or 7 gallons per acre per minute. And if you are, you're kind of shorting yourself. You can do it with a whole lot less because you can now rely on stored soil moisture. The thing is, you've got to have it in the ground. So you do have to wet it back up. So long data sets, it's a long time frame, a long window. But if this was seasonal probe data, I'd have to work that out, that full point out every single year, because I can only compare it with itself. So every year I'm learning. I can't carry anything forward. And so if I don't take it out, I can now get that single, I can learn what my full point is, and that becomes my benchmark. That's my shining light that I'm trying to get back to. So I've got a full yield potential. I don't have to do it before I plant the crop, but I still want to know where it is so I can get there even after I've planted. And then of course, here we are, 2025, and so I can now also look into the future and say, okay, what's going to be out here next? And put in an irrigation template. So I can not only learn, but I can carry it forward as well and be ready to go before I even hit the season. And oh yes, this was really just highlighting the fact that previously we only had in-season data. Now we've got the ability to measure all this other stuff, which, just put a circle around it, that's extra that you get when probes were sitting in the shed. And now we've been able to learn a whole lot more because we're getting that where did I finish, and excuse me, plan for that. You'll see how much winter moisture I had. Over here I got a lot. There I got none. So that's all extra information. So where do I put them? We talked a little bit about, Jeff mentioned a bit about variability, and the thing about a sensor is that it's like a thermostat on the wall, right? This building's got one air conditioner, but I don't know how many rooms are there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 rooms, one air conditioner, one thermostat. So I've got to put the thermostat where it's going to make the biggest difference. Now, so I pick the room or the hallway or where I'm going to be. And also, if I know that I'm going to be in a certain room that's a little hotter because I get the afternoon sun, I can crank the thermostat down a little bit and make the room cooler. Or vice versa, I can nudge it up. I can still manage my air conditioning in this building with one thermostat. And you can't have a second one because it's only controlling one air conditioner. So think of it like that. Now, where am I going to put my thermostat? I've got this big field out there, and 120 acres could be 480 acres. I mean, what am I going to do? What am I going to put that sensor to manage all of this? And I know there's variability, and so I've got to pick a spot where it makes the most sense. And even if I don't think there's variability, so this is a quarter-mile pivot, if I pan back on that, and this is the web soil survey, and this is actually just, I'm pretty sure that's Harold Grawl's place, because this is where the data came from. It's not far from here. Like, it's probably 5 miles, 10 miles, I'm not sure. Less than 10, I'll say that, away from here. And this is one soil type on the web soil survey. I mean, yes, we're starting to get some other soil types coming in there. So I would think, okay, so I'm going to come back to this. I can put it anywhere in that field. So if I can put it anywhere, for a start, I want to put it towards the outside. Why? Because the outside quarter, if that's an 8-tower machine, the outside 2 towers walk half the area, right? So the outside quarter walks half the area. So you've got to think about that. Do I want to be on the very outside? No, because I get edge effects. So I want to our rule of thumb is always to come the second from the outside span as a rule of thumb. So I get back to my pivot here. It's got no variability, but maybe it does. And Jeff talked to you about the SWAT maps. This is the same stuff. It's what's called an EM, electrical magnetic resonance machine, EM38. I don't exactly know what the 38 stands for, but it's basically like a big soil moisture sensor that you drag behind a sled, or you attach it to the, drag behind a 4-wheeler or something on a sled. And what we're measuring is where it's wetter, it should be a heavier soil type because it's holding on to more water. And so we can kind of get this soil type variability where it's drier. So there's like a sandy ridge. You probably couldn't see that by eyeballing, but that's lighter soil type. And so we wanted to say, okay, I don't want to be in the lighter soil type. I don't want to be in the heavier soil type. Give me somewhere in the middle. And then I also can look at this and go, I don't want to be where water gathers. I don't want to be where water sheds. I want to be somewhere where it's kind of the average slope. And so you can look at this, and you've got your RTK GPS that gets elevation, and you've got your soil type that we just said from the EM sled. Veris is another one, like a Veris card. So a lot of people have done this sort of mapping already, and we can look at where the average slope and the average soil type intersect, which is that black line, and then I can say, okay, anywhere in there should be the most representative. And it just so happens that I've found somewhere that's the second to the outside span, and I've got access to it from a pivot road, so hey, let's do that. And but it's an objective way of saying, kind of, where do I put my thermostat in a multi-room house? So now let's look at what happens relative to the irrigation type. So different irrigation types have got a different wetting pattern, and then different irrigation types, like a pivot, have distribution uniformity, right? So you might have kind of across the span, especially if it goes uphill, your pressure might drop off a bit. If it goes downhill, your pressure picks up, so you've got to think about that. And then I've got my nozzles. Am I spraying water out? Am I dropping water on with bubble mode? And so that all matters. And then, does that change through the season? Does my pressure drop off? Things like that. So, and then infiltration zones. I've got a really good example of that. And then we're in relation to the plant. So the planting pattern matters. Am I planting on the same AB line and shifting over 15 inches? Am I, what am I doing as far as my planting pattern goes? And then, the plant stand as well, like how everyone, this is kind of an older presentation. So 15 years ago, plant stand mattered. These days with precision planting, it doesn't matter so much. You're going to get that good singulation, etc. And so then you've also got to consider, I want to put something in the field, am I going to hit it with a spray rig and all that good stuff. So when it comes to the nozzle, like wetting pattern, I might have low elevation spray, or I might flip the pads and then change it to like LEPA with precision application. I might have low drift nozzles. I might have precision mobile drip irrigation. You've got to think about this because what happens under the ground matters. And so if I'm going to have wet spots and dry spots, I've got to put the probe where the wet spot is, because the crop will find the wet spot. The roots will grow there, but the probe can't move, right? So, and especially if I've got a permanent installation, it really matters. Sorry. And so, yeah, you need to consider this when it comes to placing your sensor and think, okay, where, what am I doing? And then the other thing is, am I changing it? Okay, I'm going to use spray to germinate, and then I'm going to flip my pads and run in bubble mode. Or I think I want to do it this way, and then you swap it out, and you started out on 60-inch spacing, and now you've gone to 30s. And so that matters when it comes to where you measure. And I can tell you, if you go out there with that push probe, that penetrometer, and feel, if you haven't done it just in relation to where the wet spots and dry spots go, and I mean you're moving like 6 inches and then another 6 inches and another 6 inches, you'll see differences. And yeah, if you haven't done it, go and do it. It's pretty interesting. So, am I watering every like plant line or every other plant line? And so you've got to think about that as well. And so you don't want to put the probe where the dry spots are. And so, if I'm spraying water on, is the crop growing up and the spray's hitting the crop and going down? Things like that. So shadowing, it all matters. And so once again, I'm not trying to scare you with this. I'm just trying to help you understand that what we read in the graphs is actually really representative of what's going on. And so we've learned by reading graphs and going, this doesn't quite look right. And then you go out there and you go, oh, okay, I've found something out. We had a situation with, I'm trying to think who it was your counterpart, but going back like 2010, 12, somewhere in there. We're looking at 2 probes, and they were both put in the plant line and everything else, but one of them, the water was only going down 8 inches, and the other water was going down 20 inches. And it's like, but these are planted on the same day, same hybrid, same nozzle capacity, everything. This was on, it's just outside town, outside Dumas. And so we went out there, and we went around and pushed around, like got our push probe and went out, and sure enough, what we found was exactly what the capacitance probe was telling us. But then it's like, well, what the hell? What's going on? And we went, probed around, and anywhere we went on one field, it went down 20 inches. And we went on the other field, I could get it down 8 inches, and then I came out and I could get it down, like literally down sort of almost 4 feet, and then it came back up. And it's like, so what was planted here last year? And he said, well, that was corn after wheat, and this was corn after corn. And so wherever it was corn after wheat, we could get that probe down 20 inches anywhere. Where it was corn after corn, what we found is, whoa, it goes down and comes back up, and it's like, well, hang on, I'm starting to see a plant row here and a plant row there, but they're not aligned. He said, yeah, because last year I planted my corn this direction, and this year I planted it on an offset, and I changed it like 30 degrees. And we found last year's root channels. And so if you haven't done it, go out and mess around, because you'll find it. You'll find what value root channels are in getting water into the ground. It matters a lot. And so here is a classic example where, once again, I haven't told you how to read these graphs, but really what we've got is these different colored lines. So that this green line is 4 inches down, and that's 8 inches, and that's 12 inches, and so on. And so when it comes up, water's gone in there. But here I can see, oh, water's gone in all the way down to this gray line, which I think is 24 inches, and here water has only gone into 4 and not to 8. Well, here is my rainfall. Every time it rained, this green line, gray line, and the orange lines were moving. We're getting that water down deep from rain. From irrigation, we're not. We're only getting it down really, really shallow. Let's go ahead and dig a hole. So we did. We went out there and we messed around. So what the rain is doing, following the corn leads to the base of the plant. Why? Because nature has designed it to do that. Suck in the rain, give it to me at my roots. But what we were doing was we were applying irrigation out here. And so it wasn't near the roots, it was in that inter-row space. And that was a different picture. This is actually from that site, and this is out of Harold Broyles. He's corn after corn, and he was no-till. And I think he's moved to strip till. This is going back a few years. But there's last year's corn plants right there, and that's where the water was being applied, and it was going straight in. It wasn't going sideways because he was bubbling it on, and it was just going straight down. And so when we went and put this probe in there, right, where the sprinkler was, we're now seeing, here's my rainfall, right, and now we're out, the plant's pulling it to the base of the plant. Now we're away from that, right? So it's not going quite as deep on rain, but when we're irrigating, it was going much deeper. So now you're sort of telling me, okay, where do I put the probe, Dave? I'm going to flip that around and say where you put the probe helps you determine what to read in there. Okay, so when you, they're just really sensitive, but what it shows you is, what it showed me is that we can create a pathway for water to get in the ground. Harold had it, right? That's his pathway for water to get in the ground. And so that matters more than just the soil. So if you can create that with cover crops and things like that, that's why strip till matters, because you're leaving most of the soil untouched, right? The more you can not touch last year's roots, the better you'll be from an infiltration standpoint. So that's the lesson I took from it. And then we kind of have to learn, where to put the probe for best effect. What we do with the permanent probe, by the way, is we'll go 7.5 inches off the road, because if you flip over 15, you're always 7.5 inches off the road. This is closer to Lubbock, I guess, furrow diking and drag hoses, or bubble mode. And this was just another set of, back in, I said I came here in 2007. One of the first things we did was work out where to place the probe. Here it is, it was buried it was actually there, under the middle of the furrow and then the side of the furrow. This one doesn't quite look like it, but it's in the plant line. And the data that you got when we're in the middle of the furrow, you can see this water really comes in. When we're in the plant line, that same irrigation didn't go very deep. It only went to that second blue line and it didn't wet much. You can see underneath it didn't do anything. When we're out where the water is gathering, we're seeing a whole lot more. And so once again, we only moved the probe 12 inches. And it really mattered with what we're seeing. So it's just, when you are using a technology that's got a small measurement zone, you have to be careful. That's really what the take home here. And so once again, rely on the experience from I guess, industry people. When it comes to subsurface drip, it depends whether you're planting over the drip or you're planting the drips between the plant lines. And so if I'm over the drip, I can't put the probe in the plant line because I'm going to hit the drip. I've got to move it off. But I'm going to have a much wetter area here, so I can kind of put it between emitters. But if I'm, if that's 15 or 20 inches away, probably 15 if you're on 30-inch setters, I got to be, the roots are going to grow over to that emitter, and it's going to suck all the water out, and I'm not going to see it. So I want to be right adjacent to the emitter and kind of close to it, so I'm between the plant and the water source. So once again, these things matter. Beautiful thing about a permanent probe is that we can dig this up when there's no crop out there and know exactly where we're going to be relative to the other emitter, and it's locked in. You learn that, and you can now start to use that year on year on year. So otherwise, previous to that, we were always having to try and learn what that wetting pattern is. And let's face it, with subsurface drip, you're wetting part of the soil, you're not wetting all the soil. And so once again, you've got to be in that wetted zone to know what's going on. And so if we have a look at these are fig trees in Australia, but it was an example that I borrowed off a colleague at the time, where there's a buried drip line here. And we're 4 inches off it, or we're 16 inches off it. And remember that drip doesn't wet out a whole lot. And so if we looked at the data from 4 inches, and we're seeing these irrigations every 2 days and every 3 days, you can see the pulses of water at all the different levels, right? We've got a big wetted volume. But if we were 16 inches away, we see a rainfall event and nothing, it's just drying out. So once again, this is sensitive but powerful, and we just have to know how to look at it. That's what we're here, that's why I'm here today. That's kind of the take home here, is that don't be confused by it, but you just got to lean into it and say, okay, now we're going to learn on this next, we're going to have a break and then learn how to actually use these signatures. And I guess rule of thumb, most people here are running pivots. There's some subsurface drip, but you can get pretty uniform. But all the things I've learned is that if you can keep that plant root, the plant stubble, coming linked to the surface, it will really help you pull water into the ground. It really does. And so running over it with a disc and breaking all those pathways is bad. So you don't want to be using disc plows much. You want to, if you're going to till, strip till, band your fertilizer in, that sort of thing. But keep the rest of the ground pristine. Try and keep that stubble line there from last year, even if it's cotton and it doesn't give you much ground cover. But I'm all about cover crops, living roots, all of that, because everything I've seen will really help you get water in the ground. And getting water in the ground in this environment is critical because it's so damn dry on top. You want to suck it in, get it down away from the evaporation and hold it in there. And we'll look at some techniques for that. So that's end of part one.